If you think a kingdom can sleep in peace, you have never stood inside a silence that feels alive. In the Ironfang Territory, silence was not absence of sound, it was control. And no one controlled it more completely than Alpha King Ethan Blackwood. His palace rose above the frozen valley like a carved monument of restraint, every hall polished, every shadow measured, every breath inside it carefully contained. Yet beneath that perfect order, something restless lingered, something even the Alpha King himself could not name. Olivia Carter moved quietly through those halls, not as someone important, but as someone who had learned how to disappear in plain sight. She was an Omega by birth, though the palace rarely remembered she existed at all, and she preferred it that way. While others served in grand, visible roles, Olivia remained in the background, tending to small routines that kept the vast machine of the kingdom moving. Her presence was soft, almost unnoticed, like candlelight in a room already full of brightness. But one evening, as the winter wind pressed against the palace windows and the sky dimmed into deep blue, something unusual happened. A storm had passed through the valley earlier that day, leaving behind scattered branches and a strange stillness in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Olivia was walking back from the outer courtyard when she heard a faint sound near the stone steps leading to the garden gate. It was not loud, not dramatic, just a fragile, uneven movement, like something small trying very hard to stay unnoticed. She followed it instinctively, her steps slow and careful, until she found a small figure curled against the cold stone. It looked like a cat, but something about it felt different. Its fur was dark, almost black, and its eyes reflected the fading light in a way that made them seem almost human. It did not run when she approached. Instead, it watched her with quiet awareness, as if it had been waiting. Olivia hesitated only for a moment before crouching down, wrapping her coat gently around the small creature. In a place like this, mercy was rare and questions were dangerous, but something about the way it trembled made her decision for her. She lifted it carefully and whispered that it was safe now, though she was not entirely sure she believed it herself. When she brought it inside the palace, the air seemed to shift almost imperceptibly. Servants glanced at her with confusion, but no one stopped her. Even Ethan Blackwood, when informed later that evening, said nothing at first. He simply looked toward the bundle in Olivia's arms with an expression that did not match the calm authority he usually wore. There was a flicker of recognition there, something buried deep beneath layers of control. He allowed it to stay. That alone was unusual. And as night settled over the Ironfang Palace, neither Olivia nor Ethan realized that something far older than chance had already begun to unfold quietly within those walls, something that would not remain small or hidden for long. The first night after the small creature was brought into the palace, nothing in Ironfang Territory changed on the surface, yet everything inside its walls began to feel slightly misaligned, as if reality itself had shifted by a fraction of an inch. Olivia Carter kept the creature in her private quarters, a modest room tucked away in a quieter wing of the palace where the stone corridors carried less echo and the air felt less heavy. She placed a soft blanket near the hearth and watched as the small black-furred animal settled into it with unusual calm, as though it understood safety was not a given but a choice it had been offered. She decided to call it Milo, a simple name that felt gentle enough for something that seemed so fragile. But even as she spoke it aloud, she noticed the creature watching her with an intensity that did not match its size. It did not behave like an ordinary cat, not entirely. It listened. It observed. And when Olivia moved, it followed her with its gaze as if tracking something deeper than motion. In the grand hall above, Ethan Blackwood remained unaware of most details, yet he found himself increasingly distracted by small inconsistencies he could not explain. Guards reported nothing unusual, servants continued their duties as normal, and the palace itself maintained its disciplined order, but Ethan noticed his attention drifting toward the quieter wing more often than necessary. It was not curiosity in the ordinary sense, it was something closer to recognition without memory, like hearing a voice you once knew but could no longer place. On the second evening, Olivia carried Milo with her as she walked briefly through the inner garden corridor, where glass ceilings allowed pale winter light to filter through. The moment they passed beneath the archway leading closer to the central court, the creature stiffened slightly in her arms. Its eyes shifted toward the direction of the throne hall, and for just a moment, Olivia felt a faint vibration in the air, subtle and impossible to name. It passed quickly, but it left behind a sense of quiet alertness, as if something unseen had acknowledged their presence. Later that night, Ethan finally saw it again. He had not planned to enter that section of the palace, yet his steps carried him there without clear reason. When he arrived at the corridor outside Olivia's quarters, he paused, noticing the faint glow of firelight spilling through the doorway. He did not enter immediately. Instead, he observed. Inside, Olivia was seated near the hearth, speaking softly to the creature in her arms as if it could understand every word. And in a way that unsettled him more than he expected, it seemed as though it did. The creature turned its head slowly toward the door, even before Ethan made his presence known. And in that instant, something unspoken passed through the space between them. Ethan felt it first as pressure in the air, then as a distant pull beneath his awareness, something that did not belong to logic or rank or reason. Olivia looked up a moment later, startled but not afraid, as if she had sensed him as well. And the small creature between them remained perfectly still, its gaze fixed on the Alpha King with a quiet recognition that should not have been possible. Ethan said nothing, yet as he turned away that night, the feeling lingered longer than it should have, like a thread quietly tightening in the dark where no one could yet see what it was connected to. The following morning in Ironfang Territory began like any other morning, shaped by discipline and quiet control. Yet Olivia Carter noticed subtle changes that she could not easily explain. Milo had become more alert during the night, resting less and observing more, as if the palace itself had begun to speak a language only it could understand. When Olivia opened the curtains of her room, pale sunlight spilled across the stone floor, and the small creature stood immediately, its attention drawn not to her but toward the distant direction of the central hall. It had never shown interest in space or distance before, yet now it seemed to track something beyond walls and corridors, something invisible but persistent. Olivia tried to dismiss it as imagination, but the feeling of being quietly observed from somewhere larger than her immediate surroundings did not leave her. Later that morning, she was summoned to assist with routine matters in the upper wing, a task she rarely received, and as she moved through the corridors carrying a small tray of documents, Milo followed without hesitation. No one questioned the presence of a small animal in the palace, but servants did glance twice, as if unsure why it felt important enough to notice. When they passed near a tall arched window overlooking the training grounds, Milo suddenly stopped walking. Its body went still in a way that was not natural for something so small, and its gaze locked onto the open space below where guards trained under structured command. Olivia paused, sensing the shift in its behavior. For a brief moment, the air itself felt heavier, as though pressure had gathered invisibly between the walls of the palace. Then just as quickly, the sensation faded, leaving only uncertainty behind. In the central chamber, Ethan Blackwood was already reviewing reports, yet his focus fractured at intervals he could not fully control. His advisors spoke of border stability and supply routes, but his attention drifted repeatedly toward unoccupied silence between their words. He noticed it most strongly when the name of Olivia Carter was indirectly referenced during administrative updates, though nothing about her duties had changed. There was no logical reason for his awareness to sharpen at that mention, yet it did. That afternoon, Ethan made an unplanned decision to walk through the eastern corridor alone, without escorts or announcement. It was not strategic necessity that guided him, but something quieter and less defined. As he approached Olivia's section of the palace, he slowed his steps without realizing it. Inside her room, Olivia was seated near the window, speaking softly to Milo while adjusting a small cloth wrap around its paws, a simple gesture of care that felt ordinary yet strangely significant. The creature remained unusually still, as if listening not only to her voice but to something beyond it. Ethan stopped outside the door, his presence unnoticed for several seconds, and in that brief stillness, something in the atmosphere shifted again. It was not sound or motion that changed, but awareness, like an invisible thread tightening gently between 3 points in space. Olivia lifted her eyes first, sensing him before seeing him, and Milo turned its head immediately afterward. For a moment, all three remained in silence that felt deeper than absence of speech. Ethan stepped inside without announcing himself, his expression controlled but not indifferent, and as his gaze settled on the small creature, a faint but unmistakable sense of recognition stirred within him again, stronger than before, as if something long buried beneath instinct had begun to respond to a truth it had not yet fully remembered. Ethan Blackwood remained standing just inside the room, his presence filling the space without effort, yet nothing about his posture suggested intrusion. It was controlled, measured, and silent in the way only someone used to being obeyed without question could be. Olivia Carter rose slowly from her seat, uncertain whether she was expected to bow or speak, but Ethan did neither command nor dismiss her. His attention was fixed on the small creature in her arms, and for the first time in that room, his composure felt slightly displaced, as if something beneath his authority had shifted its weight. Milo, still wrapped in the soft cloth Olivia had prepared, did not retreat or hide as most animals would in the presence of an alpha. Instead, it watched Ethan with an unsettling steadiness, its dark eyes reflecting the faint light from the window like still water under moonlight. Olivia noticed it first, the subtle change in atmosphere, as though the air between Ethan and the creature had become denser, charged with something unspoken. Ethan took one slow step forward, then stopped, his gaze narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in recognition that lacked context. He had seen thousands of living things across battlefields, courts, and territories, yet nothing about this small creature should have held his attention the way it did now. And still it did. Milo shifted its position slightly in Olivia's arms, and in that moment, Ethan felt a faint pressure behind his ribs, not pain, but something closer to memory without form. Olivia tightened her hold instinctively, sensing that whatever was happening did not belong to ordinary interaction. She looked between them, trying to understand what she was witnessing, but both remained unervingly still, as if a silent agreement had already formed beyond language. Ethan finally spoke, his voice calm but lower than usual, asking when she had found the creature. Olivia answered carefully, explaining the storm, the garden steps, and how it had simply been there, as if waiting. As she spoke, Milo's gaze never left Ethan, and for reasons neither of them could explain, the space seemed to tighten further, not with danger but with alignment, like pieces of a structure slowly recognizing each other. Ethan extended his hand slightly, not touching, only observing, and the moment his presence reached closer, Milo reacted with a brief, subtle shift, as though acknowledging something beneath form itself. Olivia felt it too, a quiet pulse of awareness that made her question whether she had misunderstood what Milo truly was from the beginning. Ethan withdrew his hand after a moment, his expression unchanged, but something in his eyes had deepened, as if a distant conclusion had been quietly postponed rather than denied. Without further explanation, he turned slightly toward the door, pausing only long enough to state that the creature would not be removed from the palace, not for now. Then he left as silently as he had arrived, leaving Olivia alone with Milo once again, though the room no longer felt the same. Outside in the corridor, Ethan paused just beyond the threshold, his hand resting briefly against the cold stone wall. For the first time in years, something unfamiliar lingered in his awareness, not threat, not strategy, but a thread of connection he could not yet define, stretching quietly between the Alpha King, the Omega who should not matter, and the creature that should not exist in any ordinary sense, all bound together by something that had only just begun to reveal itself. After Ethan Blackwood left the room, the silence he left behind felt heavier than before, as if the air itself had adjusted to the presence he carried. Olivia Carter remained seated for a long moment, holding Milo closer to her chest, uncertain whether what had just happened could be explained by reason or instinct. The palace outside continued its usual rhythm, servants moving through corridors, guards maintaining positions, and distant footsteps echoing through stone halls, yet inside her room everything felt subtly altered, like a chord that had shifted out of tune without anyone noticing. Milo, however, was no longer restless. It had settled completely, its breathing slow and steady, but its eyes remained open, fixed on the door Ethan had used to leave. Olivia gently stroked its fur, trying to calm her own thoughts more than its presence, but the unease she felt was not fear. It was anticipation without understanding. Later that afternoon, word passed quietly through the palace that Ethan had increased security presence near the eastern corridors, though no reason was given. The change was subtle enough that most servants did not question it, yet Olivia noticed the pattern of movement shifting around her section of the palace. It was not isolation but observation, as if the space she occupied had become part of a larger awareness she could not see. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and long shadows stretched across Ironfang Territory, Olivia decided to take Milo briefly outside again to the enclosed garden path. The air was colder than before, carrying the clean edge of winter, and the palace lights began to glow softly against the darkening sky. Milo walked unusually close to her feet this time instead of being carried, matching her pace with quiet precision. As they moved through the stone archway leading toward the inner courtyard, Olivia felt it again, that faint shift in atmosphere, like pressure changing before a storm that had not yet arrived. She stopped walking without fully understanding why, and Milo stopped with her. For a few seconds there was only stillness. Then from the far end of the courtyard, Ethan appeared. He was alone again, without escort, his presence immediate even at a distance. He did not speak or accelerate his steps, but the moment his gaze landed on them, Milo reacted in a way it had never done before. It turned fully toward him, body still, eyes locked with an intensity that seemed far too deliberate for something so small. Olivia felt her breath slow instinctively, as if the space itself was holding time and place. Ethan approached without breaking eye contact with the creature, and with each step closer, that strange pressure Olivia had felt before returned, stronger now, more defined, as if something between them was aligning into recognition. When Ethan finally stopped a few feet away, he did not reach out. He simply observed Milo with an expression that had shifted from controlled neutrality into something more focused, almost searching. Milo responded by stepping forward from Olivia's feet, not cautiously, but deliberately, stopping just within Ethan's reach. The courtyard remained silent, yet the silence felt different from before, no longer empty but charged with meaning that had not yet found words. Olivia looked between them, her instincts uncertain, as Ethan slowly lowered his gaze, and for the first time since she had known him, the Alpha King's composure carried something unfamiliar beneath it, not disruption, but recognition forming without explanation, as if a truth long buried beneath memory had finally begun to surface in the presence of something that should not have existed at all. The moment Milo stepped forward into Ethan Blackwood's reach, the entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath in a way that was no longer subtle or uncertain. It was as if the space between them had become compressed, folding inward under a force neither Olivia Carter nor Ethan could fully define. Olivia remained still a few steps behind, her hands tightening slightly at her sides, sensing that what she was witnessing was no longer about a simple animal or even a strange coincidence. Milo stood perfectly aligned with Ethan now, its small body motionless, its dark eyes locked upward with a focus that felt unnaturally steady, as though it was recognizing something far deeper than appearance. Ethan did not move immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the creature, and for the first time since Olivia had known him, the Alpha King's expression carried something that was not authority or control, but hesitation shaped by recognition he could not name. Slowly, Ethan lowered himself into a more grounded stance, not out of submission, but out of instinctive attention, as if proximity alone might clarify what logic could not. The air around them felt denser, and Olivia noticed a faint shift in Ethan's breathing, controlled but no longer entirely even. Milo responded by tilting its head slightly, and in that subtle motion, something in Ethan's composure fractured just enough to reveal an underlying tension. A memory without form pressed against him, not visual, not verbal, but emotional, like standing at the edge of something once known but lost to time. Olivia stepped forward carefully, uncertain whether she should interrupt, but Ethan raised a hand slightly, not to stop her, but to signal that he was still processing something beyond conversation. For several seconds no one spoke. Even the distant sounds of the palace felt muted, as though the courtyard had been separated from the rest of the world. Then, without warning, Milo emitted a soft, almost inaudible sound, not aggressive, not fearful, but deliberate. At that moment, Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, and a faint shift passed through his posture. It was not recognition of form but of essence, as if something buried beneath years of control had just answered a silent call. Olivia noticed Ethan's hand tighten briefly before relaxing again, a rare imperfection in his otherwise disciplined presence. He finally spoke, his voice low and measured, asking a question not directed at either of them in particular, but into the space itself, as if trying to confirm a truth that should not exist. Olivia answered cautiously, though she was no longer certain what explanation could possibly make sense. As she spoke, Milo remained still, but its attention never wavered from Ethan. The Alpha King stood slowly, his gaze now fully aligned with the creature before him, and something unspoken settled between them like an invisible thread that had been there long before any of them had arrived. Ethan exhaled once, controlled but heavier than usual, and for the first time, he did not immediately dismiss what he could not explain. Instead, he remained there, in the silence of the courtyard, as if standing on the edge of a realization that had been waiting far longer than any of them were aware, while Olivia quietly understood that whatever Milo truly was, it was no longer something the palace could contain without consequence. The silence that followed Ethan Blackwood's stillness in the courtyard did not break immediately, but instead stretched into something more unsettling, as if time itself had slowed to observe what would happen next. Olivia Carter remained where she stood, her awareness divided between Ethan and the small creature at his feet, both of whom now seemed locked in a state of mutual recognition that defied explanation. Milo did not move. Its body remained steady, yet its attention carried an intensity that felt far too precise for something that should have been instinct alone. Ethan finally shifted his stance, rising to his full height again, but the controlled authority he usually carried now had a subtle undercurrent of tension. It was not visible in his expression, but in the way his focus remained anchored to the creature as though stepping away would break something unspoken between them. Olivia broke the silence first, carefully asking whether he recognized anything unusual. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, his gaze drifted slightly, as if searching inward for a memory that refused to take shape. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but lower than usual, stating that recognition was not the correct word. Yet what he felt was not absence either. It was closer to resonance, something his instincts acknowledged before his mind could define it. Milo took one small step closer to him again, and in that movement the atmosphere shifted once more. The air in the courtyard felt tighter, more concentrated, as if unseen pressure was gathering around a point none of them could fully locate. Olivia noticed Ethan's hand flex slightly before stilling again, a rare sign of internal conflict. For someone who ruled with absolute precision, hesitation was almost invisible, yet now it existed in subtle fragments of behavior that could not be ignored. Ethan slowly extended his hand once more, stopping just short of contact, as though testing the boundary of something fragile and unknown. Milo did not retreat. Instead, it tilted its head upward, maintaining that steady, unnatural focus. Olivia felt a strange awareness rising within her, not fear, but the sense that she was witnessing the beginning of a structure forming beneath reality, something that had existed long before any of them had become aware of it. Ethan finally withdrew his hand, but not out of rejection. It was more like restraint, as though direct contact would confirm something he was not yet prepared to acknowledge. He turned his gaze briefly toward Olivia, studying her reaction, and for the first time, she felt that she was not simply being observed as a subject within his palace, but as part of whatever connection was unfolding in front of them. Without further explanation, Ethan stated that the creature would remain under observation within the palace grounds, and that no external interference would be permitted. His tone was final yet not dismissive. Then he turned and walked away, his steps measured but no longer entirely unaffected. Olivia remained in the courtyard with Milo, now aware that the space between them and the Alpha King had fundamentally changed. It was no longer about curiosity or coincidence, but about something forming quietly beneath control and understanding, something that neither law nor rank could fully contain once it had begun to reveal itself. After Ethan Blackwood left the courtyard, the palace of Ironfang Territory returned to its outward rhythm, yet nothing within its deeper atmosphere had fully settled back into normality. Olivia Carter felt it most strongly in the quiet hours that followed, when she returned with Milo to her private quarters and realized that the usual stillness of the room no longer felt entirely empty. It felt watched in a way that was not threatening, but attentive, as if unseen awareness had expanded beyond physical presence. Milo itself had changed in subtle ways that evening. It rested less, observed more, and occasionally turned its head toward distant corridors as though listening for something beyond human perception. Olivia sat near the window, trying to ground herself in ordinary routine, but her thoughts kept returning to the courtyard, To the precise moment when Ethan had stood still in front of Milo as if facing something familiar rather than unknown. Hours later, deep within the central wing of the palace, Ethan remained awake longer than usual. He stood in a dimly lit study, reviewing reports that no longer held his full attention. The pages described territorial stability and administrative matters, yet his focus repeatedly drifted away from them without permission. That in itself was unusual enough to disturb his internal discipline. Ethan Blackwood was not a man whose attention fractured without reason. And yet, since the encounter in the courtyard, something had settled beneath his awareness that resisted definition. Not memory, not instinct alone, but something layered between both. He placed the reports down at last and stood by the window overlooking Ironfang Territory. The night outside was still, the land below illuminated by controlled torchlight and distant patrols. Everything appeared orderly, yet beneath that order, he felt a presence he could not locate. At the same time, Olivia experienced something similar in her own way. As she prepared Milo for rest, the creature suddenly became alert, its gaze fixed not on her but in the direction of the palace's central structure. She followed its line of attention instinctively, though there was nothing visible there, only distance and architecture. Yet the sensation returned, faint but undeniable, like a quiet echo of awareness moving between separate points in space. Later that night, Ethan made an unplanned decision. Without summoning guards or announcing movement, he walked alone through the palace corridors, his steps slow and deliberate. He did not assign purpose to his direction, yet he found himself approaching the eastern section again, where Olivia resided. When he stopped outside her door, he did not immediately enter or announce himself. Instead, he stood still, as though confirming something only he could sense. Inside, Olivia was awake, sitting quietly with Milo in her lap. The creature was also alert, though calm, as if it had been anticipating this moment without understanding why. After several seconds of silence, Ethan finally turned away, not entering the room, but also not leaving immediately. He remained there in the corridor for a brief moment longer, his expression controlled but no longer entirely neutral. Something had shifted beyond observation now. It had become continuity, a pattern that was forming without consent or explanation, binding attention, instinct, and presence into something that neither authority nor distance could easily interrupt. And for the first time since he had taken the throne, Ethan Blackwood recognized that what was unfolding inside his palace was not simply unusual, but fundamental in a way that had yet to reveal its full shape. The night inside Ironfang Territory felt different after Ethan Blackwood left Olivia Carter's corridor for the last time that evening. It was no longer just silence or routine darkness, but a stillness filled with expectation, as if the palace itself had reached a point where something inevitable was about to occur. Olivia sat with Milo in her room, unable to sleep, her awareness heightened in a way she could not explain. The small creature in her arms had not moved for a long time, yet it was not asleep either. Its eyes remained open, reflecting the faint glow of the lantern beside her bed, and for the first time, Olivia noticed that its breathing was changing rhythm, becoming slower, deeper, almost synchronized with something unseen in the environment. At the same time, deep within the palace, Ethan stopped walking mid-corridor. He had been returning from a private inspection route when he felt it. Not sound, not movement, but a shift in presence that pressed against his awareness like a memory finally breaking the surface. Without hesitation, he turned toward Olivia's wing, his pace controlled but faster than before. He did not call for guards, and he did not announce his movement. Something within him had already decided that delay was no longer acceptable. Olivia felt it at the exact same moment. Milo suddenly lifted its head, body no longer resting but fully alert, and the air in the room changed in a way that made her instinctively stand. The lantern flame flickered even though no wind entered the room. The sensation that had been building for days, subtle and unspoken, now gathered into something undeniable. Outside her door, footsteps stopped. Ethan stood in the corridor, but this time he did not hesitate. He opened the door and entered without waiting for permission. His gaze immediately locked onto Milo, and for the first time, there was no confusion in his expression, only recognition that had finally found form. Milo stepped down from the bed without fear. Olivia reached out instinctively, but stopped when she realized that what was happening was not something she could interrupt. The creature's body began to shift, not violently, but as if layers of something hidden were unfolding rather than breaking. Light dimmed and refocused around it, and the small form that had once seemed fragile now carried a presence that expanded beyond physical size. Olivia stepped back, breath caught, as Ethan remained completely still, watching with an intensity that no longer carried uncertainty. In that moment, something inside the palace aligned. Milo was no longer just a creature and no longer just a mystery. The illusion of simplicity dissolved, revealing a presence that carried both familiarity and distance, as if it had been part of a forgotten history finally returning to its origin. Ethan spoke its name slowly, not as a question but as confirmation of something long buried beneath time and silence. Olivia stood between them, realizing that the connection she had felt from the beginning was not accidental. It was foundational, something tied not to chance but to identity itself. And as the atmosphere in the room settled into a new kind of stillness, both Ethan and Olivia understood that what stood before them was not the beginning of chaos, but the end of ignorance, where truth finally stopped hiding and began to exist openly within the heart of Ironfang Territory.